Hello, thank you for the opportunity to talk with you about goal-directed participation interventions. I'm Christine Imms. I'm an occupational therapist and I'm also the APEX Australia Chair for Neurodevelopment and Disability at the University of Melbourne. My plan for this session is to talk about what I mean by participation and how to be goal-focused in participation intervention, talk a little bit about the evidence for goal-directed interventions for participation and some key ingredients. First of all, let's think about some of the children and young people with cerebral palsy that we work with. George is 11 months old. He has spastic quadriplegia. He has gross motor function classification of 4, and he's too young to classify on the Mini-Max. He's a socially engaged little boy who's generally happy. His play is limited by his movement disorder, but he loves his food and he'd like to help himself to eat. Alice is 2.5. She has GMFCS 3, Mini-Max 2. Alice loves to walk, pushing a trolley with her toys, but this is difficult for her. Alice is showing interest in taking off her clothes and helping with dressing. Ursula's 5. She has GMFCS 2 and Max 2. Her communication function is level 1. She's very shy though, but she enjoys playing with her sisters. Her family are recent refugees and have experienced significant hardship over the past few years. Ursula will start school next year. Melanie's 12. She has GMFCS level 2, Max 2, CFCS 2. She lives in a regional town and attends high school. She loves her dog and her horse. Morris is 18. He has GMFCS 4, Max 4, CFCS 3. He's nonverbal. He loves reading the newspaper and cruising around the shopping centre. Karen's 29. She has GMFCS 1, Max 2, communication function level 3. She has a university degree and is working part-time in a paralegal role. She's struggled to maintain friendships and has some mental health concerns. People who have cerebral palsy are diverse in their presentations of their condition, their ages, and in their living situations. For each of the simple examples I've given you, participation is critical. It's the primary thing they do all day, every day, in a variety of ways, and with varying success. But what do I mean by participation? In 2001, the World Health Organization published the International Classification of Functioning, Disability and Health, the ICF, and along with the framework is shown in this slide. The framework describes functioning and/or disability as an outcome of a dynamic interaction among health conditions, body functions and structures, activity performance, participation, and contextual factors in the environment and the person. In the ICF, participation is defined as the nature and extent of involvement in a life situation. Or, if there is a problem, it's called a restriction of participation. Publication of the ICF was very positive. Its strengths based in its language and conceptualization, and provides a very good framework for research and for clinical practice. Since the publication of the ICF in 2001, I, along with many other people, have been researching participation. And my research history in this area includes longitudinal studies, qualitative studies, intervention research, and systematic reviews. Within the research in childhood disability since 2001, we have been able to map the patterns of participation across multiple countries and settings and start to understand the barriers and facilitators of participation. But also, since 2001, there's been a lot of discussion about the difference between activity and participation. The problem was there was no clear distinction between the two ideas in the ICF classification system. In an effort to address the various approaches that everybody was taking to understanding participation, we did a systematic review of the effective interventions that aimed to improve participation outcomes for children with disabilities. Our rationale were twofold. We wanted to know what worked, and we thought that researchers designing intervention studies that hoped to change participation outcomes would have clearly defined their outcomes and carefully chosen their measures. We found 7 randomised controlled trials that included participation outcomes. We also found, however, little evidence of effectiveness. The interventions tended to focus on fixing body structures and functions or building specific skills, and they did not have an effect on participation. We also found no consistency in participation definitions or focus in these 7 studies. So then we thought we would learn more about the idea of participation by looking at all of the intervention research, not just the randomised trials. So we did a systematic review of language, definitions and constructs used in intervention research with children with disabilities, and this included 28 studies. From this review, we derived a definition of participation, and we identified that there appeared to be a family of participation-related constructs, that is, elements that are important for participation but are not the same as participation. Following that review, we then did a more conceptual review to look for evidence in support of the family of participation-related constructs. And as a result, we refined the framework so that it looked like this and described participation as a means and an ends. So, following this empirical work, we defined participation as involvement in a life situation, which is completely consistent with the World Health Organization's definition, but we further defined it as having 2 essential elements, attendance and involvement. Attendance is defined as being there, being able to turn up in the activity or the life situation. And it's measured as the frequency of attending or the range or diversity of activities in which an individual takes part. Involvement is defined as the experience of participation while attending, which might include elements of engagement, persistence, perhaps social connection, and affect. It's possible you're familiar with the family of participation-related constructs diagram, but it's important to build the picture for everyone, because in doing this, I can clarify the language, the definitions, and the purpose of the framework's constructs and proposed relationships. It's important because understanding these elements help us think about how to provide interventions that will promote participation. So we start with the environment. All participation is situated in an environment, defined as the broad, objective, physical and social structures in which we live. I'm in Australia. You may be in India or some other part of the world. The environment, however, also has a perceived or subjective element, described by Maxwell and colleagues as the sense to which it is experienced as available, accessible, affordable, that's in terms of money, time and energy, and accommodating, and the extent to which any accommodations are acceptable to the individuals in the situation. When we think about the 2 dimensions of participation, attendance and involvement, it's likely that the extent to which an environment is available, accessible and affordable influences whether you can turn up or attend the situation. And the accommodations and how acceptable they are probably influences involvement. So that's the broad environment. Within our broad environment, we operate in a closer context. That's the activity setting in which we are participating. I'm at home in my home office, and you may be in yours. And in defining the context, we use Beata Betorowitz's work, and we describe the closed setting for activity as being constructed of place, people, objects, activity, and time. And now we put in the participation, which I've already defined as having 2 elements, attendance, defined as being there, and involvement, the experience while attending, that might include engagement, persistence, affect, and perhaps social connection, but remembering you can participate in activities all by yourself. Within the within-person factors are the activity competence, which is defined as the ability to execute the activity to an expected standard, sense of self, which includes self-perceptions of confidence, satisfaction, self-determination and preferences, which are the interests or activities that hold meaning or are valued. These within-person factors are influenced by participation and in turn influence future participation. They are important to participation, but they are not participation. The person in the model portrays a general self-regulating process that binds the intrapersonal processes. Self-regulation includes those executive processes that direct and monitor our thinking, emotions, and actions. So these shapes in the framework are the core concepts of the framework, but we also have considered how the constructs are related to one another, because this is important. The family of participation-related constructs is a transactional framework in which we hypothesize a range of transactional exchanges among the concepts. Between participation and activity, competence are the processes of acting and learning. Competence is an outcome of actions. That is, you learn skills over time through participation, but it's also a predictor or enabler of future participation. Between sense of self and participation, we hypothesize processes of engaging and perceiving. Sense of self evolves as a result of perceptions of the participation experience. The processes between preference and participation are choosing and complying. Children choose a preferred activity or comply or cope with the choices made by others based on past experiences or expectations for future participation. Processes between the intrinsic constructs are also important. The individual experiences a sense of competence, or not, which colours their sense of self as someone who acts in the world to achieve a goal. Between sense of self and preference is the act of interpreting. The interpretation of your past or current experiences in relation to your sense of self and competence influences the development of your preferences. So it's both through the experience and your interpretation of your experiences that preferences for participation are formed. The family participation-related constructs not only describes things that happen inside the person and participation, but also considers the processes between the environment and context and the person. The environment and context are seen as providing and or regulating opportunities for participation. They make things available or not. And the individual is seen as responding and influencing in the context or the environment. So there's a transactional influence, and both the individual and the context is changed by their presence and participation. There are some key points here to make about the distinction between the ICF and the family of participation-related constructs. First, participation is separated conceptually from the life situation. And that means participation can be thought about in relation to any activity or any life situation according to the cultural or personal circumstances of the individual or group. Second, participation is separated from activity competence conceptually. Activity competence, whether you think of it as capacity or capability or performance, are all important in their own right, but they're not the same as participation. This fundamental distinction is extremely important, especially for those with more complex impairments who may have severe activity limitations. They can still be supported to participate, and their participation should not be penalised or thought less of because of activity limitations. And third, change is understood to be transactional, as described by those arrows in the framework. This is consistent with the ICF, but our framework highlights and values those transactions as being of interest. So if that's what I mean by participation, then what does it mean to be goal-directed in relation to participation outcomes? It means that our goals and intent for change need to be focused on improving or changing attendance and involvement in life situations. There's strong evidence in support of the effectiveness of goal-directed interventions in relation to developing skills and abilities, that is, activity competence, and other motor functions. Although the Novak review referred to here highlights goal-directed training as a green light intervention, there are also other green light interventions that embed individualised goal setting into their intervention protocols. Indeed, as Wallen and Hoare indicate in their communication, goal setting is inherently intertwined with many current and evidence-based activity-focused interventions for children with cerebral palsy. So if goal-directed activity-level interventions are effective at improving activity performance, what about participation? Well, participation goals need to focus on attendance and involvement in required or desired situations rather than activity competence. And remembering that attendance is defined as being there And so goals can consider how often you attend somewhere, or the range or the diversity of activities in which an individual takes part. Involvement is the experience while participating, so goals can consider elements of engagement, persistence, perhaps social connection, and affect. Setting participation goals might require detailed awareness of the lives of children and families, because participation goals will be closely linked to personal and social and culturally relevant preferences. What could participation goals look like for our 6 young people with CP? Let's just think about 3 of them. George is an infant, so setting goals will be done with his parents and caregivers rather than directly with George, but careful consideration of his preferences and family circumstances is needed. Most common life situations for George are at home or with family in the community. He does not currently attend a daycare centre or early intervention program. For infants in particular, attendance might not be in their control, so this is something to discuss with families. To what extent is it possible for George to be in various situations? Are there life situations or activities that he could attend that he is not doing now? Involvement is the experience of participation, which might include emotional responses, engagement with objects or people, or persistence. We know he's socially engaged. Perhaps we can use that as a strength to build improved involvement in different situations. Some simple example of participation goals might be that George will participate in daily household tasks or activities with his mother. George's mother might set up 1 to 2 daily household tasks each day in ways that allow George to be at the activity. George and his mother might increase the range of situations George takes part in by joining a weekly playgroup. George will be supported to engage with the people, the place, the objects, and the activities in the situations where he is. These are simple examples, and I'm sure they fit easily in your usual ways of working with children and to build motor skills. The focus here, though, is on being in a variety of situations and, while attending, being supported to be involved, to be connected to the activity and the situation. Participation aims to provide the child with a range of experiences and opportunity. Involvement typically provides an opportunity for skill practice, but the primary focus of intent for those supporting the child is involvement. Involvement includes any or all of thinking, feeling, doing, interacting, but not necessarily having the explicit skills to independently do a task. A child might be involved in a range of elements in an activity or a life situation. What about Ursula? She's 5. She's shy. She's from Somalia, and their family have had some struggles in the past. She'll start school next year, where her parents hope she'll start to make friends. At present, the family don't have many community connections. Her life situations include family, daily living activities, school and community settings. The activities that she might take part in are culturally determined, and that will be influenced by both her family's background culture and her new country's culture, and it might not always be smooth. When we think about attendance, 5-year-olds can have some choice over their life situations or the activities that they do, and they can be involved in goal setting with the support of parents or caregivers. The frequency or diversity or range of life situations she attends could be in focus. And when we think about involvement, we're thinking about the experience of participation, her sense of engagement rather than disengagement, involvement rather than exclusion are important. Eliciting her sense of this will be needed. Does she have the language for that? Are there behaviours that those who know her well interpret as evidence of her experience of involvement in different situations? A participation goal for Ursula might be that she takes part in a storybook group in her community, attending the local library weekly. Being involved might comprise her showing interest in favourite stories, attending to the story, responding with story-related affect during the telling, or sharing books with other children, choosing a book to take home. Again, just simple examples, but what becomes clear here is the complexity of the idea of involvement. What needs to happen to support Ursula to be involved? Involvement in a range of life situations over time probably contributes to that sense of being, becoming, and belonging, which are important attributes of well-being, as well as to varied skill development. Morris is 18. He is non-verbal, He uses his personal communication book to chat with others, both familiar and unfamiliar people if they are patient. He loves reading the newspaper and cruising around the shopping centre. He'll be leaving school at the end of the year. When school comes to an end, a whole set of familiar structures shift and change. This is a complex period for every young person. For those with multiple or complex disabilities, it can be a time when their available life situations shrink rather than grow or expand. Goal setting is undertaken with the young person themselves. They may choose or need to have a support person with them during goal setting, as often their ongoing interdependence will impact the opportunities available to them. Of course, planning for the transition from school must begin well before the age of 18 and continues beyond 18, but often it's the age at which the participation experiences that young people have had in the past really impact on their future opportunities. Again, simple examples of participation goals. Morris wants to get a part-time job and has asked for help to work out some options. This goal might be supported by his participation in a structured 4-week program aimed at exploring his choices for further work training or workplace learning. Morris also wants to increase his involvement in his local community recreation centre. Currently he likes to swim, but he doesn't go very often. They do other activities there, but he has found it difficult to work out how to get further involved. A more specific goal might be that Morris will negotiate the environment accommodations that he needs with the Community Recreation Centre to support his involvement. The work of young adults and of all of us is to put in place the situations and opportunities that support them to have a good life. When the goal is attendance, participation attendance, there are aspects that we might need to think about, like how often something happens, the range or diversity of life situations and activities people are exposed to and get experience in, how long they spend in them, and the relative patterns of participation attendance across the life situations. There are multiple measures available that you can choose to support your work in this space. But we also have to ask ourselves when we're thinking about participation, how much is enough? What's a desirable pattern? When we think about participation involvement as the goal, we need to think about the depth or the intensity of involvement. We need to have thoughts about engaging in something, so that focus or persistent, or indeed engaging with that interchange or exchange between people and objects or people and people. We also need to think about whose perspective is considered when we talk about involvement. There are not very many measures of involvement, and there needs to be further work in this space. There are some. But another question for us, how does involvement change over time? And how do we influence the support of young people learning how to be involved in situations? So let's talk about participation. We have some participation goals. What do? When we think about participation interventions, we can consider them from the perspective of either participation as means or ends. When we think about participation as ends, we mean that interventions may aim to improve participation outcomes through varied means, so that participation attendance and involvement are the desired outcome of the intervention. For example, Melanie attends Scouts, but she prefers to go when the activities are in the hall. The outdoor activities are harder for her. Her participation is strongly influenced by the environment and context, along with her body, her activity competence, her sense of self, her preferences, and of course her body functions. There are some emerging evidence-based interventions that we could consider to support Melanie and her participation in Scouts as an outcome. They each focus on changing the context and the environment to support improved attendance and involvement. The first example is Canadian, the Pathways and Resources for Engagement and Participation, the PrEP program, designed and tested by Dana Anaby and her team. PrEP aims to increase participation by removing barriers and coaching youth and parents. It's a 12-week intervention, beautifully summarised using the schematic of set goals, make a plan, make it happen, measure the process and the outcomes, move forward to the next goal. Evidence to date is very positive, with demonstrated increased frequency of participation. And also in the most recent publications, there has been a demonstration that the impact of increased participation also reduces impairments, for example, reducing weakness of muscles and reducing anxiety. A second example of an environmental or context-focused intervention is Fit Skills, designed and tested for those aged 13 to 30. FitSkills is a student-mentored, community-based exercise program that aims to increase physical fitness and ongoing participation in community physical exercise. There are two key elements: matching of a university student, mentor, with the adolescent, and then the pair exercise together at a local gym. This is also a 12-week program. The mentor provides social support. They're not a personal trainer. The pair train together in it, and they use an individually tailored training program that's been designed by the physiotherapist for the person with a disability. And then there's some transition planning. The outcomes show improved fitness, and 50% of the young people have maintained their participation at the end of the program. My third example is Jessica Kramer's project TEAM, which means Teens Making Environment and Activity Modifications. This is from the US. The program was developed with and for young people with intellectual impairments. Project TEAM takes the approach of teaching youth to identify a participation goal, to develop a plan, to identify barriers and strategies, to implement the plan and check if their plan worked. A goal, plan, do, check approach. The program also teaches 5 key modification strategies that can be used in multiple places: planning ahead, teaching others about disability, using things differently, doing things differently, and changing spaces, doing it somewhere else. So these 3 examples of interventions were designed to promote participation in community by intervening at the level of the environment and the person. They did not aim to change the body structures and functions. And although skills were undoubtedly learned, the focus on skill learning was not on doing the activity itself, but on negotiating the environment. So from these and related examples, some of the effective ingredients for supporting participation as an ends include individualised, personally meaningful participation goal setting. The intervention occurs in context in the activity settings that are safe, provide learning and support family and other important people. Coaching or mentoring is provided. The therapist coaches the individual or family rather than doing for or doing to, or a peer mentor works with. There is solution-focused environmental or activity adaptations that are negotiated, and often a skilled facilitator is available. And finally, they are carefully chosen or tailored approaches that are taken within structured frameworks. What about if we're talking about participation as means or the process? In this case, we mean the interventions aim to use participation attendance or involvement as the means to another outcome or future participation. Participation, attendance, and involvement is the intervention. When we think that it is the intervention, then we use attendance and involvement to influence the child or youth's activity competence, their sense of self, their preferences, their body functions, and they influence their context and environment. Not only that, but prior participation influences their future participation. So what might participation as means look like? First of all, inclusive spaces are important. Those that are based on universal design principles so that they are free of physical barriers, provide a welcoming atmosphere, are child-centred, use friendly approaches to everybody, where furniture, equipment and or materials are suitable for all children so that any child can exercise choice and experience engagement. A second way to think about participation as means is to consider immersive environments. And these are experiential approaches where opportunities are provided by immersion in real-life, supported activity settings. These settings provide real opportunity for experiences involving personal growth, choice, and social interaction that lead over time to enhanced awareness of your own individual strengths, sense of self-identity, and a broadened sense of life opportunities. Residential life skill programs are examples of immersive environments. So residential life skill programs are intensive programs that are often focused on particular types of participation outcomes, such as work preparation, adapted physical activities, community mobility programs, or summer community arts programs. They may be offered over several days or weeks, or as day-long programs distributed over time. The key ingredients of immersive environments are supportive program atmosphere with multiple opportunities for social interactions, choice, and personal growth. There are socially mediated teaching and learning opportunities, but the strategies that are used are not intrusive. They're designed to be supportive, encouraging, and to enable engagement of children and youth within the setting. There's intentional fostering of experiences of social belonging and of control and choice. There's psychological engagement and meaningful interactions amongst participants. Following this, outcomes involve an awareness of new opportunities, a sense of hope for the future, self-determination, selection of preferred niches, and the creation of new goals. Being participation-focused means that we are starting with the end in mind. That is, positive participation outcomes for children and youth with cerebral palsy. Optimal participation contributes significantly to health and well-being across the life course. Patterns of participation start early and influence future patterns of participation. Disruptions can and do occur across the lifespan. Brief interruptions are one thing, but if children's experiences over time in multiple contexts do not support their attendance and involvement in life situations, then they become more and more specialised. They only fit in particular circumstances with lots of support. These participation restrictions lead to exclusion, isolation, and poor physical and mental health. So if we want to enable people to participate, particularly children with cerebral palsy, to participate in all the things that they need to, have to, or want to do, then starting with optimising participation attendance and involvement may lead to maximised activity competence, a positive sense of self, development of preferences for healthy lifestyle choices, and minimised impairments. In the family of participation-related constructs, the shapes are not as important as the arrows. They're important, but they're not as important as the arrows. Understanding the arrows or the transactions amongst the domains and supporting the processes is really important. As therapists, we are often focused on acting and learning to build competence, but there are many ways to support participation outcomes that need to be considered and used. Participation is attendance and involvement. Thank you.